They carried her through the streets on a throne of gold. 12 years old, barefoot, eyes lowered. The people knelt as she passed, calling her Mother of Mercy, Bride of the Heavens, Voice of the Saints. Priests claimed she was chosen before birth, that her dreams came from God, that her touch could heal. Mothers pressed their infants into her hands. Old men kissed the hem of her robe. But the court watched her differently. They whispered about the way the high priest bent to her ear before speaking in public, about the sudden gifts her family received, land, coin, protection. And then came the visions. She spoke of storms, of enemies, of God's wrath. The rulers turned her prophecies into law. She became not just holy, but dangerous. By the end of her 12th year, the same voices that once praised her were calling for her death. They say she went to the stake in silence. They say she did not burn like other flesh. But tell me, how does a goddess become a criminal in less than a year? Her name before the crown of flowers was Lucian. She was born in a small village at the edge of the kingdom, where winters were long and food was short. Her father was a stonecutter. Her mother washed clothes in the river until her fingers cracked and bled. Lucian should have been invisible to history, but one night when she was 8, she awoke screaming. Her parents rushed to her side, thinking she'd had a nightmare. Instead, she spoke with a calm they had never heard in her voice. "The river will flood in 3 days. Move the animals higher." They obeyed without question. On the 3rd day, the river swelled beyond its banks, drowning every home on the lower side of the village, except theirs. It was the first time people came to her for guidance. By 9, they were bringing her the sick. Some left healed, some did not, but all swore they felt a strange lightness after touching her hand. Whispers of blessing and miracle began to cling to her name. When she was 10, the Bishop of Cornay himself came to see the girl. He found her in a white dress her mother had sewn, sitting by the river, speaking to no one. But when he knelt beside her, she turned to him and said, "You have a shadow on your heart. You cannot pray it away, but you can change what you will do in 5 days' time." 5 days later, the bishop called off the execution of a local noble accused of treason, an act that gained him unexpected political favor. He called it divine intervention. And from that moment, Lucian was no longer the stonecutter's daughter. She was moved to the capital, lodged in chambers near the cathedral. Her parents were given a house in the market quarter and gold they had never seen in their lives. She was taught to read scripture, to recite blessings, to walk in processions with the composure of a queen. The first time she appeared before the people, she was placed on a gilded chair carried by 12 men in white robes. She blessed the crowd, and the crowd wept. Coins rained onto the cobblestones. Merchants closed their shops to follow her through the streets. The court called her the Child of Light. But even in those early months, not all were convinced. Some whispered that the bishop had found a convenient tool, an unworldly face to sanctify his will. Others swore they had seen her staring into the distance during ceremonies, as if listening to someone no one else could hear. When she turned 11, her visions became public proclamations. She foretold the outcome of battles, the death of a duke, the arrival of a plague in the southern ports. When these came true, her fame grew beyond the kingdom's borders. Pilgrims came from as far as the Eastern Empire to touch the hem of her robe. But the more her words shaped the realm, the more her position shifted from blessing to threat. Because prophecy, once entwined with politics, becomes a weapon. And a weapon in the wrong hands cuts both ways. By her 12th year, Lucienne no longer needed the bishop to announce her visions. She spoke them herself, standing in the cathedral pulpit before nobles and commoners alike. At first, her words stayed within safe borders, predictions that confirmed the power of the court, reinforced the church's authority. But something changed in the spring. Her visions grew sharper, more personal. During the feast of St. Aurelian, with the king himself present, Lucienne paused mid-blessing. Her gaze swept over the nobles gathered below, then settled on a single figure, a baron known for his loyalty to the crown. Her voice rang out, clear and cold. "You will not see the harvest. Your blood will be spilled in the night." Gasps rippled through the congregation. The bishop tried to smooth it over, calling her words metaphorical. But within a month, the baron was found dead in his bedchamber, throat cut. From then on, her visions were feared as much as revered. She spoke of famine in regions the court claimed were stable. She named 3 merchants who would betray the kingdom to foreign powers, men with deep ties to the treasury. She predicted a fire in the northern garrisons and urged that the troops be recalled. The fire came, killing dozens. The troops were recalled too late. Each fulfilled prophecy deepened the unease. Was she saving the realm or exposing its weaknesses? Was she God's mouthpiece or an omen that disaster followed? Rumors began to swirl in the palace halls. Servants claimed that they heard her walking at night, whispering to shadows. Guards swore she could pass them without making a sound, no matter the creak of the floor. A scribe insisted that when she read scripture, the ink on the page seemed to darken under her touch. The bishop tightened his hold on her schedule, limiting her public appearances. But Lucien resisted. She slipped away to speak directly to the people in the marketplace, bypassing the church's control. She told them to prepare for the great overturning and warned that the hands that feed you will one day choke you. For the first time, the crowd murmured not just prayers, but defiance. Some shouted that they would not pay the new taxes. Others refused to serve in the king's levy, citing the child of light's warning. The court could tolerate a saint who blessed their decrees. It could not tolerate a prophet who undermined them. It began quietly. Advisors suggesting that her visions might be the result of illness, perhaps a fever affecting her mind. Then came the whispers that she was not divine at all, but a vessel for darker powers. When a sudden illness swept the capital in midsummer, killing dozens, a faction of the clergy declared it a punishment for trusting a false prophet. They claimed her rise had been foretold not in scripture, but in apocryphal texts, ones that spoke of a golden child, whose lips dripped both honey and venom. The shift was swift. Where once the crowd had pressed forward to touch her robe, they now crossed themselves as she passed. Mothers pulled their children away. The same pilgrims who once kissed the ground she walked on began spitting at her feet. Still, she did not recant. In her final public appearance before the cathedral doors were closed to her, she said only, "The crown you gave me was never mine to wear, and the fire you prepare will not unmake me." It was the first time anyone had heard her speak of fire. It would not be the last. The decision to destroy her did not come in a single meeting. It was built piece by piece like a scaffold in the town square. The bishop stopped calling her child of light in sermons. The king's council began meeting without her presence. Couriers no longer carried her words to distant villages. But these were only the opening moves. The real attack began with the trial before the people. She was summoned to the great hall under the guise of clarifying her prophecies. The crowd was packed with those who had once cheered her name, but the tone was different now, murmurs sharp as knives, eyes watching for her to falter. The first question came from Father Benoit, a man who had never spoken to her before. "When you predicted the famine, did you know the stores of grain would fail because of the levy?" "Yes," she said simply. "Then you confess knowledge of a political matter beyond your station." "Who told you?" "No one." He smiled as if she'd given him exactly what he wanted. "So, no human told you?" Every answer she gave was twisted. When she said she prayed for guidance, they asked which voice she heard. When she said she spoke only what she saw, they demanded to know what showed her these visions. When she could not name it, they called it blasphemy. 3 witnesses swore they had seen her touch the sick without making the sign of the cross. One claimed she spoke in a language he did not recognize, though none could repeat the words. A merchant's wife said she refused to bless her child unless she gave away her wedding ring, a story that was never proven but spread like rot through the crowd. By the end of the questioning, prophet had become sorceress in the mouths of the mob. The court announced that her visions were inspired by unclean spirits, and that she had used her influence to corrupt the faithful. The penalty, they declared, would be cleansing by fire. The sentence was to be carried out publicly for the good of the realm. In the days before her execution, she was kept in a narrow stone cell beneath the cathedral. No visitors were allowed except the bishop. On the first night, he came to her alone. "You were a gift," he told her, "but gifts, once broken, must be destroyed." She looked at him without fear. "It was never your gift to give." On the second night, the guards claimed they heard her singing softly. On the third, the singing turned into something else, low words that made the candlelight flicker against the walls. By the fourth, they swore the cell felt colder than the winter air outside. The morning of her death, the square was overflowing. Merchants closed their stalls, soldiers lined the perimeter, children sat on their fathers' shoulders to see the spectacle. She was brought out barefoot, dressed in the same white gown she had worn at her first blessing. A crown of dried flowers was placed on her head, mockery of the one she had worn in glory. The crowd shouted curses. A few wept. When she reached the stake, she did not struggle. She looked out over the people, over the priests, the guards, the merchants, and spoke her last words. "You will not forget me. You will try, but you will not." The torch was set to the wood. Flames climbed, crackling, snapping at her gown. Some swore they saw her mouth moving in the fire, though no one could hear her over the roar. Others claimed her hair did not burn at first, that the crown of flowers blackened before a single strand was touched. And when the smoke cleared, there were those, too few, too frightened, who said they saw her eyes, open and bright, long after the rest of her had turned to ash. By sunrise the next day, the stake was gone. The ashes swept into sacks, the charred wood carried off to be burned again. The church decreed that no relics were to remain, no fragments for worship, no ember for superstition. But fire leaves more than ash. A boy who had stood at the edge of the crowd claimed he had hidden a single splinter from the stake in his coat. By nightfall, it was in the hands of a merchant who swore it could heal a festering wound. A beggar said he had found a scrap of white cloth in the gutter, and that sleeping with it under his pillow brought dreams of a voice whispering answers to his troubles. The bishop's men moved quickly, raiding homes, searching market stalls, confiscating anything said to be of the girl. Yet the more they hunted, the more objects appeared. Rings, beads, bits of stone, all claimed to carry her blessing. The king issued a decree. Any person caught venerating Lucien's memory would face prison or worse. Publicly, the crowd obeyed. Privately, they told new stories. In some, she had walked out of the fire untouched and vanished into the hills. In others, her body had turned to smoke, carried away by unseen hands. Mothers told their children that if they prayed to her at midnight, she would watch over their sleep. Farmers swore that leaving a bowl of milk at the edge of the field would keep blight away, because the child of light walks where she chooses. The clergy countered with sermons calling her a deceiver, a vessel of corruption. But each warning only sharpened her legend. Within a month, small gatherings began to meet in secret. They lit candles, placed white flowers in a circle, and spoke her name as if calling her back. These were not only the poor, there were merchants, scribes, even minor nobles among them. The church branded these gatherings heresy. Raids followed. People vanished into the cathedral's dungeons. Some were returned to the streets days later, broken and silent. Others were never seen again. Yet the stories persisted. A soldier returning from the border claimed he saw her walking along the riverbank at dawn, her gown clean, her hair untouched by flame. A washerwoman swore she heard a girl singing the same melody Lucien once sang in the cathedral, drifting from the empty square in the middle of the night. The bishop called these lies of the devil, but the people remembered the eyes that looked out from the fire, and they wondered if perhaps the devil was not the one who feared her return. By the first winter after her execution, Lucien's name was no longer spoken only in whispers. It was etched into the beams of taverns, carved into the undersides of pews, scrawled in charcoal on the walls of alleyways. The gatherings became harder to track. They moved constantly, one week in an abandoned mill, the next in the cellar of a baker's shop, then in the ruins of a burned chapel where her voice had once echoed. They called themselves Les Fidèles de la Lumière, the faithful of the light. They carried no banners, wore no uniforms. Their sign was a single white flower laid where she had supposedly walked. The church called them heretics. The court called them traitors. But to many, they were the only ones still willing to speak against the taxes, the conscriptions, the decrees signed in the king's name, but whispered by the bishop. In the villages far from the capital, her image shifted. She was no longer the barefoot child carried on a throne of gold. She was a ghost in a white gown, appearing before those on the brink of ruin. Some swore she gave warnings, others claimed she offered comfort, and a few said she demanded vengeance. The stories conflicted, but all agreed on one thing. Her eyes were unchanged. The same eyes that had looked out from the flames now appeared in dreams, in mirrors, in the faces of strangers, glimpsed for only a second. The bishop tried to stamp it out with fear. Public floggings for anyone caught with her likeness. Fines for speaking her name. Priests ordered to denounce her in every sermon. But the measures backfired. Each punishment became another story to add to her legend. Each act of suppression became proof, in the minds of the faithful, that the church feared her still. Then came the most dangerous rumor yet, that Lucien had foretold her own return. A parchment appeared nailed to the doors of the cathedral one fog-heavy morning. No one saw who placed it there. In neat, deliberate script, it read, "When the crown falls, I will walk again, and I will not walk alone." Panic rippled through the council. If left unchecked, the prophecy could turn every famine, every riot, every military defeat into a sign of her return. The king ordered increased patrols. The bishop doubled the Inquisition's reach. But neither could change the fact that in every corner of the realm, people were watching for the moment the crown might fall. And in the darkest corners of the capital, there were those who began to speak not just of her return, but of what she might bring with her. It has been years since the fire, yet the streets she once walked still carry her shadow. The white gown, the crown of flowers, the bare feet, these live now only in memory, passed from voice to voice like contraband. The church believes they buried her in ash. The crown believes it erased her from law. But the people remember. And remembering is dangerous. Every so often, in the back of a crowd at the market or standing still in the doorway of a tavern, someone will see her, a girl who shouldn't be there watching. Not older, not younger, exactly as she was on the day she was carried to the stake. The witness always notices the eyes first. They're not just looking at you, they're looking through you, as though measuring what you will become. The bishop dismisses these sightings as tricks of the mind. The Inquisition calls them heresy, yet the records of their own patrols are filled with strange notes. Subject vanished before approach, no footprints left in snow. Witness claims voice came from behind, despite visual contact. And the prophecy lingers. When the crown falls, I will walk again. Some laugh it off, some fear it. But others watch the palace walls the way sailors watch the horizon before a storm. Because what they don't say aloud is this: if she does return, she will not be alone. The faithful of the light have grown in silence, and their children were raised not on the church's gospel, but on hers. Perhaps she was a saint. Perhaps she was something far more dangerous. But here's the truth the crown cannot afford to admit. A goddess burned is not a goddess gone. And when her eyes find yours in the crowd, you will understand what the fire could not take.